All right, coming down in five, four, three, two, one. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Testudo Times podcast. Sorry we didn't post one last week, scheduling issues, but we've a lot to talk about, and we'll get right underway. This is Andrew Emmer, of course, and we are joined by our intrepid football beat reporter, Alex Kirshner. How are you, Alex?
Great, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
So let's get right down to it. Maryland's coming off a fairly impressive win in what marks their, as weird as it sounds to say, their fourth straight road victory dating back to last year. Maryland handled Syracuse fairly easily in Syracuse. Were you surprised by the result in the game, Alex?
Not surprised. I think it was maybe a little unexpected that was their fourth straight road win. Snuck up completely on me. I mean, you just don't expect that when you're talking about these Maryland teams, the way that things have gone the past couple of seasons. But I did get the sense from the start that Maryland, top to bottom, was probably a more talented team if things clicked. And wouldn't you know it, things clicked. So, I thought that it was not a wholly surprising result, though I did think Syracuse was more likely than not to win the game.
Yeah, I never made a pick last week, but I thought Syracuse was gonna win. Maryland has been a team of weird halves this year. They looked fairly horrible in the first maybe quarter and a half against West Virginia, and looked very good in the next maybe half a quarter and then another quarter before the fourth quarter. They weren't great in the fourth quarter against West Virginia, and then they looked as good as they've looked all year against Syracuse in the first half. And whether it's a matter of taking their foot off the gas or just not hitting on as many big plays as they did in the first half, they kind of sputtered in the second half. Do you think Maryland intentionally went conservative in the second half, or did they just do well enough in the first half to hang on?
Uh-huh. In advance, sorry, I think I'm losing you on the
I'll repeat the
connection here. Do you
question.
hear me okay?
Can you hear me?
No, I hear you. I heard
Oh,
you. Do
yeah.
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'll edit this all out. Don't worry about this. So
All right, great.
did you get the question?
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it. I'll pause and then get into it. Yeah, I think it's excuse me. All right. I think that it's definitely to Maryland's benefit as a general statement when they have the lead to kind of play call on the side of caution. They obviously don't have the kind of quarterback whose game suggests that it's a good idea to throw the ball down the field when you have the lead in the second half. I think the top priority was to keep the clock moving and continue to play field position football, which is something that Randy Edsall talked about a lot of this press conference today. Just moving the ball up the field, pushing it further away from your own goal line, and again, keeping that clock moving against what was a pretty anemic Syracuse passing game. And when you're down that many points in the second half, the passing game is what you need to come back. So I thought that they were probably by design a bit conservative, and I can't fault them for that.
Yeah, I remember tweeting during the game that I really hoped Terrell Hunt kept throwing the ball because it just wasn't effective. I think Terrell Hunt and C.J. Brown are fairly similar quarterbacks. I think C.J. Brown's better, but also C.J. Brown's older. He's older than everybody, so he's older than most quarterbacks in the NFL. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm not sure. I mean, Terrell Hunt is a really good athlete and really big, strong dude, hard to take down, pretty elusive in the open field, but his throwing was not impressive. I was wondering, do you think that Maryland's win this weekend was impressive in a way, or do you think Syracuse just isn't very good? Because I thought Syracuse was going to be good coming into this season, and they haven't looked great so far.
I think that any road win is worthwhile against a power conference school. I don't think that this was much of a measuring stick game because I do think we're going to find ultimately that Syracuse is not going to be very good. I think the 3-point loss to West Virginia might wind up looks about as impressive as a 14-point win against Syracuse. I don't think very much of the Orange. They've got a couple of very nice playmakers, particularly in their backfield. and at quarterback to an extent when you can run the ball like that, like Terrell Hunt can. But their defense was not impressive. I mean, their defense was beaten passing game that didn't do a whole lot other than throw short dink and dunks and then block their way and run their way for a lot of yards. So I don't, you know, I don't mean to devalue a win. I think a road win is a road win, and that's very good. But I don't think that Maryland takes too much out of beating a team like Syracuse, given what we saw on Saturday.
And I don't know about you, but I was very, very critical of the play calling against West Virginia in the second half. I just thought it wasn't effective. I was very impressed with the play calling against Syracuse. I think that it was one of Mike Locksley's best games, at least the first half, in his time at Maryland. The swing passes, as you pointed out in your great article, the just easy short throws, getting our playmakers into space. There were at least 3 or 4 just get the ball to Diggs on the flat, let him make some guys miss, and he seemed to pick up a first down on every single one of those play calls. What did you think about the play calling this last week?
I agree with you. I think they did a nice job putting Brown in a position where he's apt to succeed given his skill set. The one thing that I took some issue with, I thought that Maryland tried at least 4 or 5 times those power options to the sideline with Brown carrying the ball, and those did not work at any point. They were very ugly plays time after time. But again, some of those were in the second half when Maryland was just trying to keep the clock moving primarily in the first place. So that's, again, a bit nitpicky. I thought that for the most part, Locksley called his best game of the season.
Why do you think, and I noticed this, the C.J. Brown running game has been a big part of Maryland's offense so far this season? It just didn't seem like they were interested in running it against Syracuse. There weren't very many read options where C.J. kept the ball, and just they didn't really try to do much with the quarterback on the ground. Did you notice that, or am I crazy?
I thought that they didn't make an effort to run those kind of deceptive options or the option fakes that would lead to something like the 75-yard touchdown that we saw against West Virginia. They did make an effort, I think, to pick up some short and intermediate yardages with Brown, but they didn't have a lot of success. I want to say he ran 14 times for something like 46 yards. So I don't think that it was the same focal point of the play calling that it could have been, and that's fine given the way the game worked out.
Yeah. One more thing on the Syracuse game, though. I'll move on to Maryland's first Big Ten matchup of its in history against Indiana. But am I crazy in thinking that Marcus Leak is the best wide receiver on this team? Because he's been great so far. And not that Stephon Diggs and Deion Long haven't had their moments, but Leak has been consistently the best wide receiver so far this season.
All right. I might be playing the dreadlock card here, but tell me that Marcus Leak and Stephon Diggs, to some extent, don't remind you of the days when the Minnesota Vikings had Sidney Rice and Percy Harvin on their team. And I'm talking prime Sidney Rice, back when Sidney Rice was a terrific deep and intermediate threat and just out-muscled people all over the field. And then I think I've made the Harvin to Diggs comparison a million times, both because of injuries and skill set. I think that Leak could have a tremendous remainder of his college career and could have serious pro potential. I do think I share your view that he's an extremely talented receiver.
His hands are
just,
he has just great hands. He's just one of those receivers that just get the ball near him and he's going to catch it.
I agree. I think he's becoming, and we're starting to see it this season, that prototypical big target that every quarterback says he loves to have. And I think Maryland's very fortunate to have him back in the fold.
And one more thing, I said this was the last thing, but I'd be remiss if we didn't speak on Will Likely. He's emerged as a superstar for Maryland. He won the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week. He didn't win the Defensive Player of the Year yet. That's obviously coming down the road. But he's been offense and defense Maryland's most consistently great player this year. He seems to make a big play every single game. He scored touchdowns in Diggs or Long. He's 2 straight games with a touchdown, 2 straight games with the game-changing play. He's everywhere, and he's shorter than me, and I'm not very tall.
Yeah, everything you just said is pretty summarily accurate. He's a very talented player. Makes a huge difference for Maryland in two phases of the game. I think that he has matured a lot as a punt returner. He talked last week about how he grades himself better in the area of catching punts. He did muff a few as a freshman, and he has demonstrated defensively that he can cover receivers who are way bigger than he is.
Yeah, he
Um,
struggled against Kelvin Benjamin, but
he did.
NFL cornerbacks are struggling with Kelvin Benjamin.
He did, and he struggled to some extent against Kevin White, who reminds me a lot of Kelvin Benjamin, actually. That was a comparison that crossed my mind, too, during that West Virginia game. But for the most part, I do think he's um, not only as a special teams player, but also as a cornerback, one of the best in the conference and one of the better cornerbacks in the country.
And he's only a sophomore. And I just want to thank whoever is responsible for him being only 5'7", his mom, his dad, whoever's genes he got. Thank you for making him 5'7", because if he was 6 feet tall, he'd be at Alabama or Florida State right now. He probably should still be there. We picked out the Gatorade Player of the Year from Florida, and that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, it
But
is.
moving on to, as I said, Maryland's first Big Ten football matchup of ever against Indiana, a team coming off perhaps their biggest win in maybe a decade. Indiana, a team that beat a ranked SEC team on the road, which I feel like isn't getting enough coverage. People buried the Big Ten weeks ago, and all of a sudden, one of the Big Ten's perennially the Big Ten's worst team is going on the road to Missouri, the team that won the SEC East last year, and just beating them. I mean, came down to the wire. They didn't look great, but they beat them, and Maryland plays them this week. What are your early thoughts on Indiana and Maryland's chances?
I think Maryland's got a good chance. I think Maryland probably, like when they played Syracuse, is a better team top to bottom. Uh, but I will say that Tevin Coleman from Indiana, their running back, is just fantastic. He might be the best player Maryland has played against on offense this year, or on defense this year, the best offensive player they faced. This guy is an absolute stud. He is leading the Big Ten in rushing, despite the fact that he has only played in 2 games. He absolutely torched the Missouri defense that lost, obviously, Michael Sam and a number of other big-time senior performers that they had last year, but still, under my impression, was a pretty good defense. And he just killed him. He absolutely killed him, and he's been very effective. I think he has 8.6 yards per carry on average. So he could, given Maryland's run defense problems and the 370 spot that they gave up to Syracuse on the ground, I think Coleman could have an absolute field day. Coleman could run for well over 200 yards, and it wouldn't even be a slight surprise.
I had to go get Chinese food.
I think, okay.
No, I just came back. Continue. I'll edit it together.
I'll correct something. I think I just said Coleman's only played 2 games. I think he's played 3. But that's what I meant is that he's only played 3. You want me to just restate it, or?
Yeah, just restate it. It's fine.
Okay, I'll go through that whole riff again, but I'll make it short.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, I think that Tevin Coleman, the Indiana running back, is just outstanding. He might be the best player that Maryland's defense has seen so far this year. He's only played in 3 games, and yet he's leading the Big Ten in at least yards per carry. And I think he's just behind Amir Abdullah in total yards. But he's absolutely. I mean, he's been outstanding. He's been one of the best players in the country so far. And as we look over the numbers, it looks like there are a couple of guys who have had far fewer carries than he has, who have similar numbers to him in terms of yards per rush. But he's been terrific. He has really torched not only Missouri's defense, but every defense that he's seen so far this year. And he'll be a huge challenge for Maryland. And I think given Maryland's problems defending the run against Syracuse, where they gave up 370 yards on the ground, he could have a field day against the Terps, and that would be one thing that could sway the game in the Hoosiers' favor.
I agree, and it's weird thinking of a Kevin Wilson defense. Kevin Wilson, the coach of Indiana, that is based on a running attack. He's primarily known as a passing offensive coach. But Tevin Coleman's been fantastic. Nate Sudfeld's been their quarterback, has been pretty good, one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Maryland has done, I feel like they've done a decent job against running backs. Now, rushing attack in general, Terrell Hunt ran all over them. The USF quarterback, I can't remember his name, did a good job running against Maryland. Vic, oh man, even the JMU quarterback, the one that played at
badly, yeah.
Yeah, he ran okay against Maryland on the ground, but they contained Marlon Mack. They somewhat contained, I feel like, the Syracuse running backs. Again, not the quarterback, but the running backs. So it's going to be an interesting, especially with Maryland's injured linebacking core going up against Tevin Coleman. I disagree he's the best offensive player Maryland's seen just because Andrew White might be a first-round NFL pick. He was ridiculous, and he's been ridiculous against Alabama, and he's been ridiculous against Oklahoma. So that's just my opinion there. But Indiana, in their history, in their football history, has been a very Jekyll and Hyde team. Consistency has been the biggest problem under Kevin Wilson at Indiana. They'll have a nice win or a nice showing and then just lay an egg. They lost to Bowling Green, a team that lost to Wisconsin by 1 million just 2 weeks ago or a little over a week ago, and then they go out and beat Missouri. So hopefully we're seeing them on the back end on a little letdown game after such an important win for the program. I'm still not sold on them. As it was pointed out in Florida Fla Terps article that about the betting line that came out today. Maryland's out-recruited Indiana in the last 6 years by a significant margin. The talent is better on Maryland. The bodies are bigger. They're more athletic. But Indiana's one of those teams that can put up 45 on you before you can blink. And I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised to see it be a blowout either way.
No, I agree with you. I could see the game unfolding in a lot of different ways. I lean towards Maryland just because I think Maryland has a wider stable of offensive playmakers, and in spite of Coleman being maybe the best player on the field, I think that Maryland's going to be able to put together enough points to win in a shootout. But it's going to be a shootout. I think there are going to be a lot of points scored, and that obviously makes predicting the result sort of a futile undertaking.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what's Maryland's star wide receivers, Diggs and Long, obviously have had some struggles so far this year, barring if you take away some big 2 or 3 big plays for each of them, they really haven't had the kind of season a lot of Maryland fans were expecting them to have. But against a defense and especially a secondary, as spotty I think would be a good word. Spotty might be being too generous to the Indiana secondary. This could be the day that we see Diggs and Long really, really break out. Indiana had problems covering Bowling Green wide receivers. I don't see how they can contain Diggs and Long. And Marcus Leak now, he's emerged as a superstar in his own right. Hopefully, and it can even give them confidence moving forward, because then they face a much better defense against Ohio State. And maybe all they need, all the wide receivers need, is a jolt. 250 receiving yard days for each of them, and they're good going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is an opportunity, like with these guys, almost every week is an opportunity, but this week in particular, to really make hay in the deep passing game, to the extent that C.J. Brown is comfortable throwing the deep ball. But more than that, I think that Maryland found a formula last week against Syracuse offensively, where they now know that they can dink and dunk their way to a lot of yards. And they still have, even with the injury to Andrew Isaacs, which, my goodness, that was terrible.
I wanted to throw up.
I wanted to throw up. Awful. Even with that injury, Maryland's got a pretty good amount of offensive playmakers. And I use that word playmaker a lot because Maryland's using guys at different positions. Jaquil Vay stepping from wide receiver into the backfield. They've been using a couple of different running backs in the slot and swing them out wide. So there are a lot of guys on Maryland who I think against this defense are going to be in space. They're going to have opportunities to make catches. Long-winded way of saying that I agree with you, and I think they've got a good opportunity.
Speaking of Jaquil Vay, I was very impressed with him last week. He's really, really fast. I was watching the game with my girlfriend, and she's not a big football fan, and she saw him running that sweep play to the outside to score a touchdown, and she was just like, who is that? He is fast. He might be the fastest player on the team, and that's saying something on the team that has Stephon Diggs and Deion Long and even Tavon Jacobs, even though he's injured. I'm really interested in seeing how they use Vay moving forward, because obviously he started as a running back. Some people thought he might even be a defensive back, moved to wide receiver, and all of a sudden he's scoring touchdowns on the ground. And I don't think did he catch any passes last week?
Did he catch any passes? I can take a quick look in the game book here. He might have had a catch. Obviously, he was primarily used as a tailback, but no, he did not. He did not have a single catch.
So was Locks just kind of screwing with everybody, calling him a wide receiver and putting him on the wide receiver depth chart? Like, what is his position?
I have no idea. Playmaker maybe. Athlete. Don't they, in high school football, don't they call people athletes sometimes?
Yeah,
I always thought that was a little bit silly.
That's
but
what
they do, and okay, well then maybe it's not silly because Will Likely is very much an athlete. But he's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife of a player. He can help Maryland in a lot of ways, and credit to Mike Locksley for finding ways in 2 consecutive weeks in 2 very different ways, 2 very different capacities to get Jaquil Vay involved.
So you talked to the coaches. I know their availability hasn't happened yet this week, but what is the deal, speaking of running backs, with Wes Brown? Was he in trouble? Was it a suspension that he didn't play against West Virginia, and then he kind of barely played against Syracuse, even though they used him on some kind of weird screen plays and that kind of stuff? What is his role on this team?
That's very much up in the air as far as I'm concerned. I don't know why he didn't play against West Virginia. Obviously, people will speculate given his troubles off the field a couple of years ago, but I don't think it's entirely fair or fair at all to make guesses at what exactly it was that led Edsel to keep him out of the game. He seems to me like he's pretty clearly no better than the second option on a good day right now for Maryland. I don't know what his future holds. I don't know if he'll stick it out with this team for the next several years or if he'll, move on to some other opportunity somewhere in college football. And I don't know if he'll wind up getting 20 carries and running for 200 yards against Indiana this week, for that matter. They haven't said much. Mike Locksley said that Brown was having a nice week in practice last week, and then he obviously was used pretty sparingly against the Orange. So we'll play it by ear, and we will see what we see.
We will. And on that note, speaking of see what we see, I had some Chinese food to get to. So as we do at the end of all these podcasts during football week, we're going to make our predictions for the score, an offensive MVP, a defensive MVP, and some sort of weird outside-the-box bold prediction. I will say my bold prediction against West Virginia was that it would be the Twitter game of the early afternoon, and it was that because it was the most entertaining game that was going on at that time. But anyway, Alex, we need your score, your offensive MVP, your defensive MVP, and some sort of outside-the-box prediction for the game.
All right. My score, I do these Q&As with the other SB Nation sites, and I always put a score in there, so I have to call back and say what I said this morning and that, or I'm going to forget, and it's going to look inconsistent. I called it 41-37 Maryland. I'll stick by that. I think Terps will, again, be able to score just enough points to get out of Bloomington and come home with a nice Big Ten opening win. And I think the offensive MVP, will be one of the Maryland receivers. We'll say for posterity's sake, Stephon Diggs. I think he, like you mentioned, could be due against the secondary to really have an outstanding afternoon. And defensively, I think if Maryland is going to win this game, it's probably going to be helpful if they can contain Tevin Coleman. So I'll say Darius Kilgo, the nose tackle, is going to be very important in Maryland's run-stopping game. And if they can just contain him a bit, I think they'll have a very good shot. Maryland will.
So do you have your outside-the-box prediction or bold prediction?
Oh, my outside-the-box prediction. My outside-the-box prediction is that no matter how it winds up, Maryland fans will not be happy.
That is the most inside-the-box prediction
That's
you could
probably
possibly.
the most inside-the-box thing. Is it really? I could never guess. um, yeah, I think that it'll be a fun afternoon. It'll be nice to see how Maryland looks on a Big Ten field against a Big Ten opponent for the first time. I'm not the biggest fan of narrative, but there's a lot of storylines, and it should be a pretty neat afternoon of football. How
I
about
agree.
yourself?
All right, so I'm gonna say I have a feeling that just looking at the back of in the back of the history of Indiana football, this is the game, and it's good for the Maryland fans to be on the side of this that they just lay a stinker. I don't think they're gonna lay a stinker, but I do think that Maryland's gonna win by 10, and I think they're gonna win 45-35. And I think my defensive MVP, and I went with Sean Davis for the first 3 weeks, and I would have gone for Will Likely last week because I just ride the hot hand. But like we said, if Maryland's going to win this game, it's going to be because they contain Tevin Coleman. I'll give it to, is Cole Ferrand healthy?
That's kind of an open question every week because he's a Maryland linebacker, so how could he be? He seemed to be pretty dinged up. He didn't finish the game against West Virginia. He did play against Syracuse, and I have no reason to believe that he. And what do we know? Not a whole lot. Edsel said he'd have injury updates later in the week.
All right, so if he's healthy, I'll go with Cole Ferrand, and if he's not healthy, I'll say Andre Monroe, who's also been a beast so far this year. I go safe with my defensive players of the week.
I will tell you, we after I was at the stadium today, I did see Andre Monroe at the Stamp Student Union. I want to say at could it have been Moby Dick? It was either Moby Dick or Salad Time, preparing himself for the game.
I thought you were going to say he was wearing a walking boot, and I was going to start crying.
I can't confirm that he was wearing a walking boot. In fact, I can confirm that he was not.
What was he getting at Moby Dick? Because when I used to go to Moby Dick, I would get like a nice like a gyro platter. So I found that their gyros didn't give you enough meat. So the gyro platter, they really piled it on top of there.
I was having a discussion with someone about this today. I never eaten at the Moby Dick at Stamp. I've gone to almost every other establishment in that food court. Been to Sbarro more times than I can count. I don't know what he was getting at Moby Dick. I'll see if I can find out from Brian Stewart tomorrow, and hopefully have something on the site by Friday about
that. Would be big. A little investigative journalism.
Yeah.
We've had clothing a lot recently with the Maryland flag on it. But yeah, we want to know what Andre Monroe eats. He's a big dude. He's got to eat a lot. But anyway, so he's my defensive MVP if Cole Ferrand is not healthy. My offensive MVP, I think C.J. Brown has improved every game so far this year. So, and then now he's about to go up against possibly the worst secondary he's faced all year, and that maybe includes James Madison, because James Madison has some players in the secondary that were recruited by Maryland and Tennessee, or went to Maryland, and I think one of them went to Tennessee and then transferred there. So this might be the worst secondary he's faced all year, and I'm going to go with C.J. Brown. I think he gets off the schneid. I think he has a really nice game, something like 30 of 37 for like 310 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. I think that would be really good to get Maryland fans off his back. And my bold prediction. Now, I always ask for the bold prediction, but I'm having a trouble thinking of one myself. I'm going to say, how about this one? I'm going to say that Stephon Diggs or Deion Long, one of them, have 200 yards receiving. I don't think it's
Okay.
that bold against the Indiana secondary, and I think that they're going to have one of these games. One of them is going to have a big game one of these days, and it might as well be against Indiana. So both of us think Maryland wins their Big Ten opener, which would be great, and Maryland would be 4-1. But saying that, Maryland will probably lose. That's how Maryland sports go, and everyone will be injured, and will be very sad, and say, "What were we thinking?" next week on this podcast.
And
Any
I think I would just like to add that's a fantastic segue. I know you were going to close us out, but you mentioned that you feel good about C.J. Brown this week. Do you know where C.J. Brown's from?
Pittsburgh,
That's right.
Cranberry
He's from
Township,
Pittsburgh.
Cranberry Township, PA.
Something like that. I want to say he's from Seneca Valley. I'm from a little bit south of there, but on that note, the Pittsburgh Pirates are looking to wrap up a playoff spot tonight. So I think while you excuse yourself for that Chinese food, I'm going to be pulling up MLB TV. Go Bucks.
Yeah, man, we know C.J. Brown's a Buccos fan. We know he's a Steelers fan. We know he's a Penguins fan. I know a lot of
Is
Maryland
this
sports fans maybe hate him for that.
Has he? Is he? That's confirmed. I haven't asked.
Absolutely. Yes.
I had a brief discovery, and he was also from Pittsburgh. I do this a lot with people from Pittsburgh who are in College Park, but I guess I'll have to talk to him about that next time I get the opportunity. You think they'd be all right with that if I asked that at the press
I think
conference?
absolutely. I think absolutely.
I don't think so. I think they might be very. I think I might lose my credential if I did that. But just kidding.
All right. So
Anyway, though.
for Alex Kirshner, for all the Yinzers out there, for Andrew Emmer, this was the Maryland, this is the Testudo Times podcast. Go Terps. Hopefully we'll talk to you next week with a 1-0 in the Big Ten in our history. I don't know how to end a podcast, so this is how I'm going to end the podcast. Goodbye.
All right.